We're in California this hour. We've got a brand new trial, the drunken judge murder trial for defendant and former judge Jeffrey Ferguson. Prosecutors say that the judge drunkenly pulled a gun out and shot his wife Cheryl during an argument. Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson has the background.
Orange County Criminal Court Judge Jeffrey Ferguson has handled many murder trials, but his next one is a first. This time, the 74-year-old judge is the defendant, standing accused of the August 3rd, 2023 murder of his longtime wife, Cheryl. Early in the evening, the couple dined with their 23-year-old son and argued with each other about money. At one point, Ferguson allegedly pointed his hand at Cheryl, as if he was aiming a gun. After returning home, the argument continued, with Cheryl reportedly saying to her husband, "Why don't you just point a real gun at me?" Police say Ferguson then pulled his Glock from his ankle holster and fired one shot, hitting Cheryl in the chest. Ferguson and his son then called 911. While waiting for emergency crews to arrive, Ferguson texted his clerk and bailiff, quote, "I just lost it. I just shot my wife. I won't be in tomorrow. I'll be in custody. I am so sorry." Ferguson's attorney says the shooting was an accident after the judge had been drinking. Initially freed on $1 million bail, Ferguson was taken back into custody after a judge determined that he'd lied about drinking alcohol while free. Ferguson's bail was doubled to $2 million, which he posted.
Now, the state delivered its opening statement on Wednesday. During it, the judge got to hear a portion of the 911 call and see some of former Judge Ferguson's police interview. Take a look.
Good morning. I want to begin by introducing you to someone you're not going to hear from in this case. This was Cheryl Ferguson. Cheryl Ferguson was a longtime resident of Anaheim Hills, California. She was married to the defendant for many years, and they had a son in common, Philip Ferguson, whom she was very proud of. He was 22 years old in 2023 and living with them for the summer back home from Southern Methodist University, where he went to college, in between his senior and fifth year. And Cheryl Ferguson's life was taken from her by a man who had vast experience on guns, had owned guns for many years, had specific training on a concealed carry weapon that he had on his person at almost all times. On August 3rd, 2023, the defendant, despite receiving specific warnings that he was not to consume any alcoholic beverages while in possession of the concealed carry weapon on his person, came home from work at approximately 3:30, had a beer, had a rum and coke, and then went out to dinner with Cheryl Ferguson and their son Philip at a local restaurant in Anaheim Hills. And he had his Glock 40, his concealed carry weapon, around him on an ankle holster he had on his left leg. At the restaurant, he had some margaritas. Cheryl Ferguson and the defendant got into a heated argument at that restaurant regarding finances and lifestyle choices they were making. It got so bad, at one point, the defendant in anger made a fake gun motion as if he was shooting her. This upset Cheryl. She left to cool off in the car that was waiting outside. And Philip confronted his father and eventually left for a few minutes to cool off as well. After that, they came back and eventually left that restaurant back to their home in Anaheim Hills, California. Once home, they had a habit that summer of watching television in their family room, in the back of their home, right near a sliding glass door and near the kitchen. And you're going to see photos in a moment when I go through the crime scene photos. The defendant would sit on the couch facing the television with his back to the sliding glass door. Right behind the couch, there was a small table, and Ms. Ferguson would sit in a chair that was facing the couch and the TV. Philip sat on the far side of the couch. So the defendant was closer to Cheryl than their son. They continued arguing, even though they were watching television. Eventually, Philip got nervous, got up at one point, walked around to the kitchen. The issue of the motion by the defendant using that gun came up again. They started arguing again. And at one point, Cheryl Ferguson said, "Why don't you use a real gun?" At that point, the defendant took his Glock 40 gun, after he'd been drinking, pointed it at Cheryl Ferguson. It's a fully functional gun, as you'll hear in the evidence. Applied 5 pounds of pressure to pull the trigger and shot and killed Cheryl Ferguson. Before I get into additional details in this case, and I'm not going to go through all the details, it's going to be a lot of things, a lot of exhibits, but I will discuss some of the big points. Before I get into it, I think it's important that you hear from the defendant as to his perspective, as to what he did and what should happen.
Kelly, nice to meet you. You licked my ass. I did.
Some background. Again, married for well over 20 years. I only mention that it's the defendant's second marriage because it's relevant to one of the arguments they were having that evening. There was an ongoing problem. Of course, they had one child, as I mentioned, you're going to hear from. Nice young man they were very proud of. Philip, who will come and take the stand. They also had another son. I should say the defendant had a son from a prior marriage named Kevin, late 30s at the time, still providing financial assistance to, and that was causing conflict between Cheryl and the defendant. And they would commonly argue about financial issues during this time frame. Defendant, you're going to hear through evidence, was a very experienced gun owner and had an extensive number of guns. He'd owned them for decades. He's familiar with how they work. He'd go to the gun range. And he had obtained a concealed carry weapon, it says permit, but it's actually a license, numerous times, and received specific training on what you can do and what you shouldn't do, and what it means when you put your finger on the trigger of a gun. And of course, you heard, he was a prosecutor for over 30 years and also a judge, in a unique position to understand the dangers of gun violence. You'll see and you'll hear about the defendant's concealed carry weapon license agreement. So in order to get a concealed carry weapon, you have to agree to certain terms and conditions, and he signed that. And it, again, received training as well. And it specifically states when you have that concealed carry weapon, because of the dangers of alcohol combined with guns, he is not to consume any alcoholic beverage. August 3rd, 2023. Defendant, as I mentioned, got home around 3:30. When he gets home, he had a beer, and then he had a rum and Coke of unknown quantity. They go to El Cholo. It's a restaurant in Anaheim Hills around 5:40 p.m. All three of them, their son and both of them. You'll see video from the El Cholo restaurant. It'll show you the entryway. It shows you a hallway. It does not show actually where they're seated. They didn't have a camera in that area. But you will see them enter the location. Defendant had margaritas with dinner with his Glock on him, despite specific warning that he's not to, and his agreement that he would not consume alcohol while he had that Glock on him. They had that argument about finances, it's about Kevin, it's about money generally, purchase that the defendant wants to make. It's heated. And during that argument, as mentioned, the defendant makes that motion with his hand as if he has a gun. Cheryl gets so upset, she leaves the table. You can see on the video she goes out to her car, which is in the parking lot. Philip confronts his father, and he asks him, based on how heated it is, why don't you guys just get a divorce? He responds, he can't afford a divorce, Cheryl. Philip gets upset, needs to cool off, just walks around for a few minutes. He doesn't leave the restaurant, just kind of walks to the front, comes back. Returns the table. Finally, Cheryl returns the table, and they all leave. Before they leave, there's again more arguing. The defendant's on his second margarita, and there's some discussion, just shut up and drink your margarita.
This is unbelievable. Yet this happened. Here we are, that judge sitting there at the defense table. Just incredible. We're going to hear the rest of the opening statements when we come back. Don't go away. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Julie Grant. Before we continue showing you the drunken judge murder trial and the opening statements, we want to take you to South Carolina for just a moment to let you know that defendant Zachary Hughes is going to be returning to the stand for cross-examination. Court's going to start up today at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, but the judge put a restriction on when we can begin the broadcast. It is 30 minutes from the time that court begins, so roughly 11 a.m. Eastern will be the earliest that we can show you his testimony. As soon as we can, we promise we will. Now, let's turn back to California for the drunken judge murder trial. Judge Jeffrey Ferguson, accused of shooting and killing his wife during an argument. The 74-year-old defendant is heard on police video saying that he shot his wife, Cheryl. But the defense team argues that it was an accident. Let's go back into the courtroom where the state is delivering its open.
The defendant's on his second margarita, and there's some discussion, just shut up and drink your margarita, from the son and the wife. And eventually he only drinks about a third of his second margarita. Cheryl drives home. They continue arguing in the car, and they get home, and they watch Breaking Bad. This is the television show that became their habit, to watch Breaking Bad in that family room. Again, you'll see photos in a moment of what that setup was like. They're sitting there watching Breaking Bad, and during the episode, they watch first episode of this show, not necessarily the first episode, but an entire episode. During it, the defendant still has the gun on his ankle holster. You will hear that the defendant would have this gun on him at home unless he was showering or sleeping. Just walks around with it. As they watch the show, they continue arguing. The defendant makes comments in the show. Cheryl tells the defendant to shut up. Philip gets upset, gets up, and walks around a little bit, eventually walks behind to go to the sliding glass door at one point. He actually has a replica sword. He's a history buff and collects swords, and out of concern, he kind of grabs it for a moment. And then this happens. They continue arguing about the defendant pointing his finger like a gun. Cheryl's very upset. And at one point, she says something to the effect of, "Why don't you use a real gun at me?" And that's when the gun takes his gun, points it directly at her vital organs, her torso, and shoots her, killing her. Philip, he's behind the couch, as I described. You'll see photos in a moment. He jumps over the couch to tackle his father to get control of the gun. Defendant tells Philip, "Let me up." And Philip says, "I'll let you up if you let go of the gun." Eventually, the defendant lets go of the gun. Defendant gets up. Cheryl Ferguson's last words were, "He shot me." It's the last thing she ever said. Defendant tells Philip to call 911. Philip calls 911 as the defendant leaves the location where Cheryl Ferguson is dying, bleeding, and Philip Ferguson has to take care of her and try to provide aid while he's talking to the 911 dispatcher. And this is a portion. You're going to hear the entirety in evidence. I'll play the entirety of the 911 tape. It's long. It's difficult to listen to. It's painful. I think you're going to find it to be rather disturbing. And it will also test your patience at points when you listen to the dispatcher, but that's just the nature of this call. This is a portion of it.
Oh, sorry, is there anything I could do?
Hey, PD, it's Metro. I have a caller on the line that said that she's been shot. Hello?
Hello?
Talk to the police, okay?
508, he's Kenny to drive. And shot. She's currently on the ground, face down. She was shot from the front. Looks like the bullet went fully through.
Okay, police and paramedics on the way. Do you know who shot her?
My father.
Where is dad right now?
He's in the house currently.
What's your dad's name?
Jeffrey Ferguson.
Do you know his date of birth?
September 30th, 1950.
And you said Jeffrey Ferguson, correct?
Yes.
Do you know where she's at inside the residence?
I don't know. I'm right here with my mom right now. I just got gun from him and I have it with me.
Okay.
He doesn't seem like he's not.
And where did you guys at inside the residence?
We're currently towards the back of the house in the family room. She's lying on the ground. She has his hands covering. I don't know what's got a little moving on.
Is she conscious awake?
Mom, can you hear me? Mom, can you hear me? Shake your hand if you can hear me. I don't think so. I can't tell. She's gurgling. It sounds like she's trying to breathe, but she's not responding when I said her name.
Okay, how old is she?
She's 65. She just turned 65 last week.
65. Okay, do you know if she's breathing?
I think she's breathing because she's gurgling. It's like an inhale, like, but it sounds like she's gurgling.
Okay, you can take over.
And you hear that is Jeffrey, correct?
Yes.
Okay, what's your name? Is there any other guns inside the residence still out?
Yes, but none that are easy and shit. They're all locked up.
Does your dad have access to those?
But I think like he said, if I heard right, he was going to open the front door for the paramedics to get in here quick and easy.
I'm sure your father was going to open the door.
Yes.
Did your dad do any drugs or drink at all today?
Did he what?
Did your dad do any drugs or drink at all today?
Drink.
Do you know how many drinks he's had?
I don't know. The breathing feels like it's getting shallow. I don't know if I can tell, but it's...
Okay, I have the unit that's almost there, okay?
Okay.
Do you know what car do you guys have?
There should be a Chevy Avalanche in the driveway and a red Honda something or other.
Did you hear any vehicle startup? Is it possible that your dad may have left?
I didn't hear any, but I couldn't hear from the front if he did.
And do you know if your dad has a middle name?
Malcolm.
Okay.
I should also say I have the gun right here with me. I haven't unloaded it, but where should I put it for when the cops come next? Where should it be? Should I keep it here or?
Hear it? Or you guys are out?
I don't know.
What can I
I don't know. I'd say the Glock, I think, Glock 40 caliber.
And your dad is he white box standard for agent?
What?
What color shirt, what color pants is he wearing?
I don't know off the top of my head. Probably wearing black pants.
It's just you and your mother, the resident, from what you know?
It's just from what I know. I think he's still in the restaurant, but I don't know where he is. He might be waiting outside too. I don't know. I'm sorry. Do you know how fast? How much longer?
They're just down the street. They're almost there, okay?
Okay.
And is your mom still breathing?
She's still breathing, but it's gotten shallow, I think. I'm putting pressure, but I don't know where the entry wound is. She's lying face down, so I don't know where the entry wound is. I don't know. Where?
Yes, has your dad right? Is it the Chevy Avalanche or the Honda?
The Chevy Avalanche.
Just keep applying direct pressure until they arrive, okay?
I don't know. I don't know. So I don't.
Sorry. You'll hear the rest of it in evidence. At one point in the 911, he describes what he saw. Right after the murder, the defendant texts his co-workers, his court clerk, and his bailiff. So right after the murder, his first thought is to text coworkers. And his statement is, I just lost it. I just shot my wife. I won't be in tomorrow. I will be in custody. I'm so sorry.
Wow. Chilling words from that judge. A long career he has had. He is 74 years old as he sits on trial here and now for the murder of his wife, admitting to the killing, admitting it. But the defense here at trial is that it was an accidental shooting. We know they were drunk. We know that argument got heated. How did it go from the margaritas and a nice, pleasant dinner, going home to watching their favorite show, Breaking Bad? Great show, by the way, and his one lawyer looks a lot like Mike Ehrmantraut. Any fellow Breaking Bad viewers will get that reference. How does the night go from that to a homicide? And then the judge having to tell his staff he's not going to be in. Get someone else to handle the docket. He is out. Let me bring in trial attorney and former prosecutor Randolph Rice. Randolph, good morning to you. Your initial reaction to what we're seeing revealed in this opening statement, please.
Well, there is a lot to unpack here, Julian. You're right. This is just a crazy story. I think it seems like that this was a argument and a disagreement between the judge and his wife that had been brewing for some time. And certainly it sort of reached a max peak at that restaurant that night when they started drinking and the judge started consuming alcohol, and probably his emotions were taking over. He then goes home, and like they said in the opening statement, it kept going and kept going to the point to where he pulls out this gun and he shoots and kills his wife. It just is an incredible story, which you would think somebody like a judge who is so even keeled. We elect and hire judges because they have an even temperament and they can control their emotions. But obviously there was just too much that night for that judge.
Right, Randolph. This is just so stunning and so preventable too, right? You know, when you think about this, alcohol and bad arguments don't mix. I mean, we know that. Go into any criminal courthouse in the country right now, and I bet you'll find a case just like that. Tell me your thoughts, please, about how this escalated. Drawing on your trial experience, can you see how this kind of built up and then culminated?
I can actually see it. I mean, I sympathize as a defense attorney with the judge that he certainly had he had gotten to the point of breaking with this argument about, sounds like, finances and some other issues that had been going on. But like you said, when you couple that with alcohol, alcohol takes away that reasoning, that good judgment, and you start making bad decisions. And couple that with the fact that you have a firearm strapped to your ankle. Look, when I was a prosecutor, I had a wear and carry permit. I had to carry one because, as you know, it was part of the gang unit, and we had threats, and I had to have a firearm. And one of the big rules they always told us was you cannot have that firearm when you're drinking. So that was a big rule. So to couple the firearm and the alcohol and the arguments, a dangerous, perfect storm.
Right. And Randolph, thank you for sharing that. That's something this judge should know, and that is responsible gun ownership 101. Right? You know, I mean, that is very true. That's an excellent point. I have many more questions for you, please, Randolph. Stand by. We're going to hit a break as we're at the bottom of the hour now. When we come back, more from this stunning case in California. This is Orange County. Beautiful area where this judge who served for many years on the bench has found himself on the other side of the law.
Detectives arrested 28-year-old Brian Christopher Kohlberger.
You never know. Like our neighbor was, a possible quadruple murderer.
We have a big development to share with you now in the case against Brian Kohlberger in Idaho. This is the Idaho student murders case. And the judge who's overseeing this one just made a big ruling that the key DNA evidence will be allowed in at trial. You remember us talking about how Kohlberger's attorneys filed a motion to suppress that genealogical DNA evidence. They fought hard. They argued about it. This is so key because it is a direct link with him to that crime scene where Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Kaylee Gonsalves, and Ethan Chapin were slaughtered. This evidence is now going to be used by the prosecution against him. His touch DNA evidence, skin cells, on the snap of the knife sheath that was left in the bedroom where Maddie and Kaylee were found dead. Kohberger's trial is set for August. This is a death penalty case. We'll continue to update it as we learn more information. Now, let's go back to this stunning case in California that has everybody talking, the drunken judge murder trial. Judge Jeffrey Ferguson is 74 years old, finding himself on the other side of the law after shooting and killing his wife, Cheryl. He admitted to it, but the defense is that this was an accidental shooting. We're watching the state's opening statement. Let's go back in.
And then the defendant, after texting his coworkers, calls 911.
Hello? Yeah.
Who is this?
Jefferson, I need paramedics.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, they're on the way. What is your phone number, sir?
7824.
7824. What happened? They're on the way. I just want to know what happened.
I don't want to talk about it right now. Sorry.
That's the defendant's statement. He's a judge, he's a prosecutor, he's calling 911, and that's what he says. You're going to hear from an officer. One of the first witnesses, actually the third witness you'll hear from, is the first officer that goes into the residence. He has a body camera, all the officers do, and this is actually a screenshot from that body camera. You're going to see it in its entirety, the video, and to the point where he checks the pulse of the victim, and she's already passed away. This is the perspective from his body camera. There's Philip trying to provide aid to his mother. And finally, this is also a screenshot where the officer is checking the pulse. After this happens, they still attempt to provide aid, and the paramedics come in, but she's already passed. While the defendant is detained outside his home, police encounter him, and he makes some statements. Among those are, he wants his son to hit him in the face, that everyone will hate him for what he's done, that his son will hate him forever. He also talks about his career as a prosecutor and about how he is now like some of those folks that he used to prosecute. Once he's placed in the police vehicle, he says under his breath, "I killed my wife." And this is from I'm going to show you a body cam from inside the car. Some of these things I've been discussing in more perspective. There's the front door. Here's the family room. You see the tossed over chair. That's actually the chair that Cheryl Ferguson was murdered in. As officers arrive to get to her body, they move that chair out of the way to get to her as quickly as possible. But it was actually about where you see that paramedic bag, the red bag. That's where it was originally before she fell over. Here's the perspective of the crime scene. Looking towards the kitchen, you can see Cheryl Ferguson's body there. Fortunately, her shirt is not on. There are going to be photos without her shirt on because they're trying to render aid in the case, and she has a bullet hole in her. This is from the kitchen, looking back at the family room. And as we look at this photo, you see some evidence markers on the ground. There is the sheath of that replica sword I mentioned that Philip had grabbed at one point. And looking at the ground, you see number 4. That's a shell casing from the shot. Okay, now, when you'll hear testimony about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly where the shot occurred. Shell casings can move around also because of the struggle between the son and the father. It could have moved around as well. But they did recover the shell casing. This is the chair Cheryl was in when she was shot. Evidence marker A is actually the bullet hole that went through her. This is looking in the kitchen. You see on the ground the officers had to move Philip's phone and his gun from near the body to that location. So Philip didn't move these. They were moved to render aid to the victim. Looking at it again, you can see the gun. And the bullets recovered from the wall. Okay. Bullets, after they go through objects, may change their trajectory a little bit. So that's not necessarily a direct trajectory from where the shot was fired. Bullets recovered. Anaheim Police Department took a 3D image of the crime scene using something called Faro technology. And so it allows them to do measurements based on those photographs. And so you may hear certain measurements. For instance, in this particular photograph, you can see the distance from the body, as it was shown in the crime scene photos, to the wall where the bullets recovered, and also the body to the couch where the defendant was seated just before the murder. During the search of this residence, officers determined that there are a number of cameras, security cameras, including a rear surveillance camera. They recovered the information from that camera, and it kind of focuses in on the family room, but unfortunately there's a reflection, so you see a lot of the pool. You can't really make out some of the people in certain parts of the video, and it's also very old and poorly maintained technology, so it jumps around. Now, it's a piece of evidence, though. It has evidentiary value because it gives you an idea. When you look at this, and I'm going to turn around here, you can see Cheryl Ferguson sitting right here before the shot is fired. The evidence, I think, is going to show that the defendant's somewhere here. You can't see him because you can see the reflection of the pool here. But you can make out Cheryl, and other times in this video, you'll see Philip kind of walk around, get up, walk around, and finally you'll see some, eventually the defendant leaving the location. After the shot's fired, Cheryl's arms kind of drape over the chair. It skips around a little bit. It's a little frustrating, but you'll get it in evidence. And then eventually she falls backwards. You're going to hear from a pathologist who's going to describe the injuries, the coroner. So the bullet hole here, and I'm going to use my laser again to show you the difference. This is the actual injury here, the one that's in the midsection.
Oh, my. Can you imagine? Think about the long marriage, too. His long career on the bench, his marriage, all of it now in jeopardy. I mean, you know, he could go to prison for the rest of his life. He's 74 years old, and there's nothing that can bring his wife, Cheryl, back. We're going to hit a break. When we come back, we will hear the rest of the opening statement in the drunken judge murder trial. Jeffrey Ferguson, the defendant, on the left there, on the other side of the law, and his wife, Cheryl, the victim. Stay with us.
When you go into a trial, you try to eliminate surprises.
Did he ever use the N-word?
Yes, he did.
That was a surprise.
The goal was to get him to lie. Have you used that word?
Not that I recall, no.
Anywhere that he was involved was tarnished.
I was heard uttering the N-word 40 times. How do you pull that back? You don't.
Trial and Error. Why did O.J. win? A Court TV original series. New episode Sunday night, 8 Eastern and Pacific. Only on Court TV.
Back to court we go now. We're in Orange County, California for a brand new trial here on Court TV, the drunken judge murder trial. Judge Jeffrey Ferguson is accused of shooting and killing his wife during an argument after the two went out to dinner and had margaritas. The 74-year-old is heard saying on police video that he shot his wife, Cheryl. His defense team now at trial is arguing that the shooting was accidental. Let's go back into the courtroom where the state is delivering its open.
So the bullet hole here, and I'm going to use my laser again to show you the difference. This is the actual injury here, the one that's in the midsection. This up here that's marked was to provide aid. So the shot came in the midsection here and then exited the top of the back area, kind of in a semi-diagonal area. which indicates it's consistent with a person who's kind of leaning back in a chair. There's going to be DNA evidence that you'll hear about. There's mixture of DNA on the gun. Remember, Philip was rendering aid to his mother and then also was handling the gun. You'll also hear about blood alcohol. The defendant's blood alcohol was taken at the station about 7 hours after the incident. You're going to hear from a forensic scientist who will describe what happens to alcohol over time. 7 hours after the incident, his blood alcohol is about a 0.065. Because when you take in alcohol, it burns off over time. So his rate was much higher at the time of the incident than it was 7 hours later. Forensic scientists will testify his blood alcohol content was at least a 0.17 at the time of the murder. The gun is examined. You'll hear from an expert from the sheriff's department. It's pulled, crime lab. Over 5 pounds of pressure. It works the way it's supposed to work. It's not a hairpin trigger or anything like that. It's a fully functioning Glock that requires that you deliberately pull the trigger. It worked properly. And it was loaded. The defendant always had it loaded. Defendant makes spontaneous statements at the Anaheim. These are not the result of police interrogation. You'll see he's just kind of, a lot of it's him sitting around. So the video you're going to get, it's going to be a bunch of statements kind of compiled together. It's going to be over an hour, but he was actually being processed for over 5 hours. So we took that, and you'll get a transcript on it. The actual video is what you have to rely on. The transcript's just merely there to aid you. Somebody else wrote the transcript. If you hear something different on that video than you see in the transcript, or you hear something different on that video than anything I say or counsel says is on that video, rely on your own hearing. You heard this already.
This is Joey. This is my ass. I did it.
Defendant makes several other statements. He does show remorse, regret at times, cries, shows a lot of anger towards himself. He makes this statement.
Because I went to my son and or subterfuge or anything.
And finally, they change him out into a different outfit. This is part of the processing. And at this point, he just says, send me on my way.
No.
Pretty soon you're going to hear from witnesses in this case. And you'll have an opportunity to consider all the evidence. At the end of the case, I'll have an opportunity to talk to you about the law and the evidence you've heard. Thank you.
Really sharp opening statement by this prosecutor here. Oh, and then leaving with those heavy words from the judge saying, convict me, send me on my way. Yet here we are. Here we are. And under the law, the judge is cloaked in the presumption of innocence. While the facts are bad, state's got to prove them. Got to prove them. Innocent until proven guilty. So how do we get from point A to point B? If he does want the jury to believe that this was accidental, how do we get there? Let's bring in our legal analyst guest, Randolph Rice, and get his thoughts out. Randolph, what do you say to that question, please?
Well, this is going to be tough for the judge's defense to argue because anybody that's ever used a Glock weapon, there's two very important safety features when it comes to accidentally firing that weapon that prevent that from actually being an accident. One is there's a trigger guard that prevents any type of mechanism or finger or anything hitting that trigger. Secondly, Glocks have a very unique safety, which is almost like a second trigger within the trigger that you have to press first to then pull the trigger, which takes 5 pounds. So to accidentally shoot a Glock takes a lot of effort. So that's going to be a tough argument for the defense.
Randolph, you know your stuff. You know your stuff. Yeah, it's like you hit a wall. When you pull that trigger, you hit this little wall before the gun fires. Yeah, and so great point. How's he going to get there? I can't wait to see what happens in this case. I wish we had more time to talk with you. Your analysis is always incredible. Randolph Rice, thank you for being on the program and watching the opening statement with us.